I was skeptical when Kentucky author Barton M. Nunley first proposed a documentary about the Kentucky Dogman. I had asked him to appear in my next documentary film that, like my first, would profile paranormal and Bigfoot investigators. I hadn't heard much concerning this Dogman beast, but after doing some research and the timely appearance of an alleged Dogman video on YouTube, I decided to give it a shot. And man, was I in for a big surprise. The name Spottsville Monster is a name for the beast seen primarily by the Nunley family and their friend we'll call Roy in the early 1970s in the farming town of Spottsville, Kentucky. When Bart and his brother-in-law Tom Olson led me to the site, I found myself amazed by the amount of growth that occurred in 36 years. There was little that the forest had not taken back. We walked on through the thick undergrowth to a spot where his family's home had stood. The only building left was an old chicken coop.
This area here is where my family lived back in 1971 where I spent the first 5 or 6 years of my life. The barn and the house has been torn down for years and years. The whole area has a history of hairy monster sightings, Black Panther sightings, and actually even UFO sightings. Just down the hill here is the Green River. If you want, we can walk back there and take a look at it. This is where the barn used to sit. It was built on an Indian burial mound. Actually, it's a series of 3 mounds. We're standing on the middle mound. There's one over to the right and another one over here to the left. It's grown up so much you can't see it now, but that might have something to do with all the strange things that happen around this place.
Oftentimes, paranormal activity in western Kentucky is associated with Native American burial grounds, which are everywhere. After a good rain, these fields are littered with artifacts. The forests along the shores of the Green River in western Kentucky are unbelievably lush, reminding me of stands of hardwood in my home state of Florida.
This is the Green River, home of all kinds of unknown animals, Black Panthers, Bigfoot, water monsters. UFOs have even been seen coming up out of this river. Right across the river is the Hebbardsville Bluff City area. That's home to what they call the Great Hill. The Cherokee people call it the Great Hill. It's probably one of the most sacred Cherokee sites in Kentucky.
Well, my mother, my stepdad, and us 3 girls moved out on Wilson Station Road. About 6 of us in the front bedroom playing, just like little kids will do, and Mother and them was back in the back of the house. And we was just running around there playing, and I happened to go over to the front window, and there was this thing looking in the window. The horriblest sight I ever seen. And then I hollered, and then a couple of my cousins looked out there, and they started screaming because they seen it too. It looked in the face kind of like a dog. It didn't have no long snoot, and its face was wide, you know, like ours. It was more of a round. And it had terrible scars on its face, or to me it looked like scars. And it had some kind of a white blouse or a shirt on. Of course, we was all scared, and we took off running toward the back of the house, and I didn't hang around to see any more. Well, it looked more like a dog, really. I don't know, Bart. It scared me so bad to look at the face. The face and that white shirt is what I seen the most. and it scared me so bad that I didn't really notice any of the other part of it. We ran out of the room, back there where Mother and my stepdad was. They went out the back door to go around the house to see if they could see it. They didn't see anything. So naturally, they said we was imagining things, but we wasn't. And you know, and something like that, I can still see it, just like it was yesterday. I can still see that face. That face and that white blouse is what I noticed the most. But I never heard anybody else mention anything. But you tell people that kind of stuff and they think you're crazy.
The first time I saw it, I was out squirrel hunting, and I had been slipped through the forest still hunting squirrels, sneaking up on them, and saw a squirrel on the top of a tree, shot it, and as this gun went off, I heard something behind me squeal and take off, and I turned to look and saw, that was the first encounter I saw anything like it running on its hind legs away from me with hair, and it did upset me, because I wasn't real sure what I saw. So I left there and went over to actually Bart, your mom and dad's house, and I didn't know it at the time, but it went up and introduced myself and told your dad that I had just seen something that was unusual out there behind the house and wanted you to know that it was there, and asked him basically if he knew what it was. But it was running through the woods. I didn't realize it was as big as it was, but it was running on hind legs. And it was fairly good size, kind of reddish to reddish brown in color, and it startled me. And in fact, I even forgot to pick up the squirrel that I shot. And so I came on home, and well, your dad was kind enough to ask me to come back and anytime and hunt woods there behind the house. And I said, well, I told him I already had permission to hunt it from the guy that owned the land at the time, and he said, well, you come back anytime you want to, we'll have coffee or something. So that was the first time I saw it. And it kind of made a eerie kind of sound, like I startled it when I shot, you know, and it startled me because it was so close behind me and I had no idea it was there. And evidently it had been following me as I was following the squirrel through the tops of the trees. It was slipping up behind me in the woods. Thinking back, I don't really think it had any intentions of harming me, but I think it was more curious as what I was doing there, and then when the gun went off, of course, it made a loud bang, and I think it startled it, and that's why it ran off. No, I've heard guys around here said that that's happened to them, but that had never happened to me. Now, thinking backwards, this is 32 years ago, and my memory is pretty good, but as far as the actual events and how they come in sequence and stuff. I remember that day real well because I'd never met Bart's parents, and I immediately liked him, and I think he liked me too because I was friendly with him, you know. But we got to be pretty good buddies after that. And I would say within the next week or so, it was shortly after that, I was back down there again. I told your dad at the time, the first time I met him, I asked him permission to go back behind your house, and I already had permission, like I said, to hunt it, so I figured, you know, I better get permission from him too, because he's new, and I didn't know him, and I asked him anyway, and he said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And I told him at the time, I said, I'm going to look around and see if I can find any kind of sign of an animal what size, or try to figure out what it was. So I started basically about every day I was off work. I'd go down there and I'd snoop around a little bit and look, and I was down there. I guess the second time I saw it was about middle of the afternoon, and looked like it was getting ready to come a big thunderstorm, and like it does around here. And I was down there close to the old barn, the old long barn down there in the bottoms, and I thought, well, I'll make a beeline over there because I could see a rain sheet coming, and it was raining pretty hard. So I run into the barn and got inside the barn and stood there, and just a quick shower coming up. I thought, well, I'll walk to the other end. So I started walking down through there, and I got toward the other end, and I was standing there looking out through the rain down into the bottoms down there, and I felt something behind me. I don't know how else to explain it. I just felt like something was there. And when I turned around, I'm standing within 6 foot of something that was taller than me, and I'm well over 6 foot. So I looked right up in his face, and it had red eyes, not real piercing red eyes. Later, I saw one that had menacing looking red eyes, but this one did have red eyes. But he was tall, and I would say minimum of 8 foot, because I had to look almost straight up at him and stand within 6 foot of him. And I immediately got fearful, and it actually transferred a thought to me. It said, "Don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you." And that in itself, I didn't know whether my mind had said that to me or if it had actually said it to me, because that was the first time I ever had an encounter of something telling me without speaking. It spoke to me through its mind or through my mind. I don't know how, but it and as weird as that sounds, that's crazy. That's the only way I can explain it. And it immediately turned and kind of hurried out the short end of the barn, right past me. He was both close to the end of the barn. Of course, he was behind me. He'd come all the way through the barn like I had behind me. So he just went around me and went out. And I noticed that he went out. It was raining. And there's a muddy field out there. So I stood there and watched it run through the thing on hind legs. No 4-footed animal is on the hind leg. If it ran out through the plowed field, there's got to be tracks, because it's raining out. It's muddy, you know. And I went out there and looked. There wasn't a track one. And I thought, now that am I hallucinating? I really questioned whether I'd actually seen what I saw. And just to be honest with you. And I got back up to my truck. I come home, and I didn't tell anybody for a long time, not even your dad or anything. And about a week went past or so, and I was back down there again, and he's outside in the yard when I went past, and he kind of waved me down, and I was going back to doing a little more snooping around. I got a little more courage up. And in broad daylight, I thought, well, you know, it's okay. And I was carrying a gun, and I thought, well, I'll go back in there and check around. I did talk to him for just a minute, and wanted to tell him I told him I'd seen something again, but I didn't tell him everything, and I didn't tell him I was that close to it. But anyway, I thought, no, I like this man. I don't want him thinking I'm some kind of loon, or I'm stupid, or making this crap up or something, you know. So I got back in my truck, and I drove on down the road, and I parked the truck and walked the entire back slough that was back behind there. Didn't find a thing, and got back around where there was no corn crib. Clear back around from behind your house, back almost up here to the within about a mile here, and there was a corn crib, an old corn crib, hadn't been used in years, and part of the bottom of the corn crib, I guess where they'd taken the corn out, probably the last time they used a crib, had they pulled the slats away from the building, and I thought, well, it might be a place to look and see if there's anything there, and I found some. In where the boards had broken a little bit, there was some long reddish looking hair, and I thought, well, that don't look like dog hair or anything like that. So I gathered a few of them up and stuffed them in my shirt pocket, and proceeded on back and started back and walked all the way back around, which is 3/4 of a mile back behind your house, back from where my truck was. And I was walking down along through the slough down there, and I had to look down, and I found something that looked like either a claw or a tooth or something. And I picked that up, kind of wiped the mud off of it, and whatever it was old and it wasn't fresh. And I thought, well, it's too big for a canine tooth for a dog, and it sort of resembled that of a wild boar, but knowing there hadn't been any hogs down in there in a long time, I thought, well, it may be just an old tooth, you know, something like that. So I just stuck it in my pocket too. And I brought all that home, put it in a cabinet, and I kind of sat on it for a while. Then after that, your dad was down. I went down there again, looking around, trying to figure out what in the world was leaving that hair and stuff. And that's when I stopped and talked to your dad, and he said he'd lost a dog. I believe it was either a dog or a goat first. I can't remember for sure now which one it was. One or the other.
Yeah.
The dog, I think, was first. And so I told him, I said, well, I'll go out and look, see if I can find anything of the dog. And didn't take long to find some remains of the dog. Well, I didn't know for sure if that was, because I never did ask your dad. I told him I found a dog, and I never did ask your dad if it was theirs or not. It could have been a coyote kill, but back at that time in '75, we didn't have that many coyotes around here. And so one night he called. It was right about dark, and as best I can remember, he called and said, "Could you come down here? We're hearing some noises out around a goat pen or something that he had down there." And I said, "Sure, I'll be right down in a minute." I grabbed my shotgun and put some slugs in it, deer slug. And drove down there, parked my truck, and walked up to the front door, and he said, whatever it was, it's out there right now, in back. And I said, well, okay, it wasn't quite, it's just twilight, it wasn't quite dark yet. So I walked around the house, and walked out there, and of course I could not see anything. Nothing much coming that night, and so I excused myself and come on back home. Best I can remember was either a few nights later, I don't know exactly how many nights later, he called up, he's frantic. And he said something to beat on the back door. I ran back down there real quick and pulled the truck up, left the headlights on this time, and got out of the truck and grabbed my shotgun, went to the door, and hollered, and I told him, I said, "Red, it's me, and it's Ron." And he said, "Listen," he said, "would you mind staying here a while?" He said, "We're afraid." And I said, "Yeah, sure." And then I come up with the idea. I said, "Well, why don't you have you got a ladder? Let me get up on your roof." And so I climbed up on his roof and sat there by the chimney. And I sat there. It was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and mosquitoes had ate me up. And you can remember those mosquitoes down around that bottom was tough, and they were eating me up. And I hadn't heard or seen anything. And I finally come down the ladder and come back down and told him, I said, "Well, I'm going back to the house because I'm getting ate up." And I said, "I haven't seen anything yet." And I didn't even want to get back to the house. He called. In fact, he called Ann, and Ann answered the phone, woke her up, and he said, "Listen," he said, "tell Ray to come back down. It's right out here in the backyard." As I was coming up the road there in front of the house, something ran from the barn out into the woods, but I could not identify it. I couldn't make sure it could have been anything, but I did see something. It was just whenever he'd call, I'd go down. The police got where they would not. Didn't want to come back out there. The newspaper got a hold of it. Anyway, they persisted in writing articles about calling it the Spotsville Monster and things. And there got to be quite a chaotic thing of people running up down the roads at night down there with flashlights and shooting guns out truck windows. And I remember that somebody's dog got shot accidentally. A big dog, I don't know if it was a Great Dane or something, but anyway, somebody's dog got shot down there, and a bunch of teenagers done it. And so within the next day or two, the police and the game warden come out here, and they politely told me that I was to stop telling the newspaper that there was a monster out here, and that I was to not go back and set foot on Mountain Ridge Road again, and that I was to leave it alone, or they would prosecute me with some kind of makeshift charge, or they'd come up with something. And then just before they left, they said, "Oh yeah, and by the way, next the Gleaner's going to come out here tomorrow to interview you. Would you need to tell them that it's a bear to stop all this silliness about a monster." And I told him, I said, "I will not do that. I will not do that." I said, "I know what I saw. If you want to put what I saw in there, then fine. But I'm not going to say it was a bear." And they said, "Well, you will or else." And I said, "Well, you just else right now because I'm not going to do it." And I said, "Those people are frightened." And I said, "Somebody needs to do something." I said, "The police have not been down there several times." And I said, "They don't do anything when they go down there. They won't hardly get out of their vehicle." And they didn't like that much. And but anyway, they left. And it wasn't shortly afterwards, that afternoon, Gleaner come up, and that time I had taken a partial cast of a footprint that I found out. One of the boys, I don't know which one now it was, but one of the kids had seen this thing standing out in the cornfield off to the left side of the road there, and I had gone down to check on your parents that day when your kids was in school and see if they was all right. And your mom had told me she got out on the porch and pointed where the kids had seen the thing standing in the cornfield. And I said, well, I'm just going to go out there and see if I can find some tracks or something. And there was just enough print there that there was 4 toes and a partial part of the foot. All in all, it probably wasn't that big that I could cast. There were some other things that I probably shouldn't say about the bear situation, but there was an actual bear showed up down there. I believe with all my heart that somebody brought it in, turned it loose to cover their butt. Okay, I really do. So rumors spread through the paper that the thing was taken care of, everything was solved, no end of the mystery. The first time I saw the aggressive one was when I walked down and saw the portal for the first time. I was coming out of the woods, and I'd been down there hunting and looking around, more or less for your dad. And I come out and looked down across the field and happened to come out where I could see the old fence line running down across the property. And it looked like heat waves coming up off a blacktop road, because there's no blacktop out there, just soil and grass. And it looked to be about maybe 12 foot across. I don't know, 10 to 12 foot anyway. But it had a real shape to it, but it looked to be width-wise about that width. And it didn't go up real high, but it went up in the air, kind of dissipated, And I thought, well, it was unusual for a heat wave to be out there, so I walked out to see what it was, and I got within about 20 yards of it. And right in front of me, an older, meaner, very aggressive, very red-eyed, very, very mean, whatever you want to call it, Bigfoot or whatever, stepped out of that thing from nothing. Okay, I was looking right into it. He appeared, stepped out, looked at me, and with his mind, said, "Leave me alone." I heard in my mind this same voice that I heard before, and it said, "I thought I told you to leave me alone." And I didn't even turn around. I knew that I'd be petrified again. I just absolutely could not turn around. And the sound of his voice and the fierceness of it, I didn't want to turn around. And so I just thought right back to it, and I said in my mind, I'm not bothering you, I'm duck hunting. And I said, I'm leaving right now. And I walked straight away from it, made a big curve, went back across the open field, went up, got my truck, come home. Well, a few days later, I had a heart attack. That's when I went to the hospital, and I did all right on a heart attack. Then they took me over to Welborn, laid me on a gurney over there, took me to the operating room, was going to do a catheterization on me. And they made the little incision and started to run the catheter up through there. And from what I understand from the doctor, my heart stopped. And when it stopped, I tell you, Bart, it was the most wonderful thing I ever felt in my life. If a person ever thought about heaven or hell and never believed in or disbelieved in it, I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anybody, I didn't see anybody, but I saw the most beautiful color blue, like a blue sky I've ever felt or ever seen in my life, and felt all the good words. I mean, just like love, compassion, everything, all those good words all rolled into one. And really didn't want to come back. And I don't even remember why I came back. But yeah, I had some things going on, but I want to explain something about that. My doctor had called me dead on the operating table. They had shot stuff at me, they'd give me the paddles and everything, nothing worked. And so he had already made it out through the operating room doors and into the waiting room, and was telling me that I had passed away. And luckily, there was a nurse that Ann had been a Sunday school teacher to, and she was still had a hold of my hand. She was taking my pulse like that, and she said my hand come across like this and held her fingers. And she said about that time one eye come open, and my heart started registering on the monitor again. And she ran out of the room, got Ann, and Dr. Ann beat the doctor back in her room. And by the time she got in, I was conscious again. And I told her, I said, "Hon, I love you and the kids, but I didn't want to come back." The portal three different individuals. I'm pretty sure it was different individuals. In 2001, I was hunting down in here in the bottoms. I was up in about a 12-foot ladder stand hunting deer, waiting for a deer to come along. And this creature come walking down through the woods, and it walked right up underneath the stand, looked up at me, and it was female. She stood there and looked up at me, and I had seen her coming, and I thought, oh God, here we go again, you know. And I motioned with my hand. It was off to the left. I said about a half mile that way, and it wasn't far from your original house. And then so she just walked out through the woods and vanished. I mean, you know, it just went on. It was like a hunter or somebody coming up to you. And then and nothing happened from '01 to '04. And Ann and I sitting out here on the pond bank fishing, and one of the males, I guess it was a male, it sounded like a male, come up through the woods and never come out of the shadows. And it asked for support. And I pointed back to unfortunate house. I said, probably about a mile from here. I said, it'd be hard to find because the landscape's changed. And it said, yes, that's why I can't find it. And
So it said this telepathically.
it said it just that plain. I mean, just like I know that sounds so stupid, so far out, but that's exactly how it happened. And I spoke back to it, told it what direction to go, and it left. No harm, and it just left. And I said, Ann, did you see that? She said, I saw something in the shadows, but I could not make out what it was. I think what it is, we're living in the same time dimension that these things are. Because, for one thing, the evidence, if something runs out across the field and it's raining, there should be some tracks. Okay?
Definitely.
There's no tracks. It startled me so bad, and it was so aggressive in its thoughts and in its actions that I think I passed out. I really do, because I lost some time. There's 15, 20 minutes I could not remember, and I ended up being 400 or 500 yards from where I was at. But I know I didn't get drugged there or anything like that. I mean, I probably walked there, but I don't remember what happened for 15, 20 minutes. And it was a state of shock. It could have been, honestly, I've thought about this thing top to bottom many, many, many times. To see something that can't possibly be there, that no one else can see, or maybe they only appear at certain times and they only want to be seen at certain times. I've gone every question, every answer you can think of, and try to logically figure it out. I don't see any possible way to logically figure it out. In order for them to disappear. Now, granted, the only thing I thought about that too. I thought about the fact that they disappear in front of your eyes. Is it the shock factor that we're looking at, or is it just the fact that they can do it? I know that the one is. He's very aggressive. I would classify him as being a hunter. I would classify him as an alpha male. You got good animals, you got bad animals. You got animals with attitudes and other animals that are passive. I think the old alpha male would have hurt me that day if I'd have turned around. I do. I think the old one would have hurt me. And that's the reason I didn't turn around. Actually, in the animal world, it would be more of a muzzle of a bear, short and stocky looking, and a little bit larger teeth, both upper and lower canines. The red eyes would be something that nothing else has had. And like I said, the older one had the most fierce, almost glowing like red eyes. Glowing is probably not it's over exaggeration, but a more menacing looking red eye than the others did. The female didn't seem to have, her eyes were red, but they weren't red. You know, they weren't intense red. And I sensed a calmness with her. I don't want to really say like a gorilla type hand, but a bigger type hand than a human. Like a young athlete, more muscular, that type. The older one was just big. And you can tell he'd been very strong at one time. He's probably still very strong, but it was, as it was getting older, you know, like an older person, You lose that tone. It didn't have that real sharp tone cut to the muscles like the other one did. When you encounter what your parents and I encountered down there and didn't get the help for, it was very disheartening because I almost got in a fight at work. In fact, I challenged my whole company and all the guys, 16 guys. Okay, I challenged them all. I said, "Come outside. We'll settle this right now." And I was that mad and that upset because they wouldn't. It was not so much they wouldn't believe me, but they wouldn't believe the fact that something was bothering your parents. Well, I've told you of the circumstances since I had the heart attack. I've been able to communicate better with animals. I mean, not talk to animals, but I mean, I can control animals. Now, that really sounds far-fetched, but like pets and stuff. I mean, they mind me better. They seem to have more respect, and it's like animals know, They know that there's something there, and I don't know whether it was something happened to me when I was dead or.
There's something about the idea of a half-man, half-wolf canine that really strikes fear into the hearts of people. It's the idea of a creature that combines our most fearsome predator with the cunning and intelligence of a human that just makes people quake. I became involved with this whole phenomenon of researching dogman, man-wolf, some people like to call it a werewolf, when I was working for a small newspaper in Wisconsin, and my own hometown began having rumors of some kind of, they were calling it a werewolf and reporting it to our county animal control officer as having seen this thing that most resembled a werewolf. It was 6 or 7 feet tall, hairy, walked on its hind legs, was often seen chewing or carrying roadkill or deer carcasses, and we decided to do a story on it for the newspaper, never dreaming that it would gain the international attention that it did. It went out on AP within weeks, and it has never stopped since. That was 15 years ago. The creature that people call, most often call a werewolf, but that I like to use the term man-wolf for, because I don't believe that it's a Hollywood-style Lon Chaney werewolf in the traditional sense. Some people also call it a dogman. It seems to be the same creature. And what's described in almost all accounts is something that stands 6 to 7 feet tall, can go between walking on its hind legs to walking on all fours, has a pronounced muzzle, sharp pointy ears on top of its head rather than a rounded skull like a Bigfoot, walks on its hind legs like a canine on its toe pads, leaves very different prints. They're very dog-like rather than Bigfoot-like, but larger than a normal dog. The color ranges from gray to brown to almost black, as you would expect within any normal canine species. And it is described as having a challenging glare by very many witnesses. The eyes are often described as shining yellow when it's seen in, for instance, the headlights of a car. And it has a pretty good set of fangs on it, and people who've gotten a good look at the forelimbs and the forepaws say that the paws almost seem elongated, not like a human hand exactly, but longer and sort of finger-like rather than like dog paws. Well, the creature has been sighted all over the United States and actually all over the world. I have reports from as far away as France. but it seems that it's most concentrated in the states of Wisconsin and Michigan, mostly in the southern half of Wisconsin, and in Michigan up in the UP and down to the very southern end of it. It goes as far south as Texas, into the near western states, and as far east as New York State, the northeastern tip of New York State, down through New Jersey and Kentucky, Alabama, Florida. It has a very wide range. Lots of people ask me if this could be a shapeshifter, and there are several different traditions of shapeshifter in medieval times, and really a lot of our Native American tribes believe the same thing, that rather than actually changing blood and muscles and all kinds of body tissue into the form of another animal, that it's actually almost more of a psychic transformation, that the mind creates a thought form either around the body or separate from the body that can go out from it. And this can be supported by several sightings where people have seen the creatures seem to morph either from one animal shape into another or from something that they thought was rather human-like in the beginning. And in fact, I had one witness encounter from Madison, Wisconsin. This was right in the heart of the city, where a man was walking on a sidewalk late at night and saw at first what he thought was a human crouching down, and then it appeared to be that he was looking at a canine shape. And before it was all over, it stopped, turned around and looked at him, and had the face of an ape, or he said it reminded him of a gorilla. He was a graduate student at the university with a double science major, so he was a pretty good witness in my book. Well, after 15 years of researching the bipedal canines, as I like to call them, because I think we don't really know what they are, people always want to know what I think the creature actually is. And unfortunately, I haven't had a really good sighting of one myself. And until I do, I think the jury is still out on that. But my two top theories are that it's either a specially adapted, heretofore unknown species of canine that perhaps has become very intelligent and very elusive due to its adaptation of being able to walk upright when it wants to, but also being able to walk on all fours when it wants to look like a more normal animal and perhaps escape detection. The other idea would be something along the lines of the Native American shapeshifter, where you have some sort of a magical mental process going on that the people are able to create thought forms that look like these creatures. Or it may be just a spirit being of its own. Some Native American tribes believe that this and the Bigfoot are both spirit beings that can exist transdimensionally. They are both in our world, and then when they choose to, they can find a portal, if you will, and go back into their own world or other dimension, and that this very nicely explains why one has never been captured or caught. They're very able to elude us by just going to another dimension. I've had a few people tell me that they thought they saw what I would call a man-wolf lying dead in the road. I've had several reports of this, and they usually describe it as a wolf-like creature so large that it lay almost across the whole road and covered it entirely. And I think the fact is that if you did see one of these animals dead, there's nothing in their appearance other than that they seem to have shoulders, which normal canines don't have, that would indicate that you were looking at anything but a huge dead wolf. And even if you did see an unusual structure in the shoulder, looking at one just lying down, you might just think that it was sort of an unusual musculature, wouldn't give it too much thought. You would just think that you were seeing an extremely large dead wolf or dog hybrid. I don't think anyone has captured one alive to my knowledge. I do kind of hope that someone might be able to tranquilize one someday and be able to bring it where it can be studied. I do believe that the hundreds of witnesses who have come forth and told their different encounters with this creature are, for the most part, very credible. Many of them have never heard of the creature before. They saw it, so they didn't have prior experience to feed their imaginations. And I think that the sightings lore and database that I've built so far is incredibly consistent in both the description and the behavior of this creature. I've never had anyone personally come to me with a story about being attacked by it, although they think they're going to be attacked. People are very afraid of it. It's very aggressive. It will act as if it's going to attack people, but then in the end usually just gets away. I know there are some other reports that other people have had, but I don't personally have any. With the exception of one man in Quebec who was attacked by a creature that lunged at him, grazed his hip with its fang, and then he was able to take a picture of it later for me. That's the only real attack contact that I've had reported to me personally. So it seems that these creatures are really more interested in getting away from us and being unseen than they are in having us for lunch. I do think that if people were going to make something up, they would try and spice it up with injury reports or make it seem a lot more dangerous than that.
back in the late 70s, and I was down here for summer vacation visiting with my cousins here in Grand Rivers. It was about late, very late in the evening, dusk, but the sun was still up. I was around 17, and one of my cousins, the female, Rhonda, we were sitting on a porch swing. She was about 9. And we could hear him in the distance, and as he approached the house and got closer, I noticed something a little bit different in the engine sound. And it was like it was in one gear. He came up out of the woods and hit the top, crested the hill where the driveway came down to where we was going. And he just seemed in a panic, and he came down the hill with the dirt bike. He even just let it slid sideways and let it go out from under him and slide down the hill. And he was alarmed, he was shocked, he was panicked, he had tears in his eyes were wide, his mouth was open, and he had scratch marks on through his Levi jeans, and he was saying it was chasing me, it was trying to get me, and he was kind of like incoherent. He wasn't, he was speaking frantically, and he just kept repeating it. It was chasing me, it was trying to get me, and it's after me. And I jumped up, and my cousin Rhonda, she grew fearful of our reactions, and he said, we need to go in the house. We need to get in the house, during the same period, they raised basset hounds. And the basset hounds in the pen that were directly across from us were just absolutely going berserk. They were howling, they was barking, they was gnawing at the fence, trying to get out the fence. It was just chaos for a few seconds. It was just chaos. Rhonda and I got up to turn to go into the house. I really wasn't understanding what was going on, and it was at that moment that this creature appeared at the top of the driveway that came up. I was just paralyzed. I stood in shock, and Rhonda had already turned to go to the front door of the house, and Joey, he looked up and he says, there it is, there it is. That's when it came through the creature came through the woods, at the edge of the woods, and came up to the top of the driveway. And I was just in awe. I was in total shock. I was paralyzed with fear and confusion, and because everything that Joey had been saying, that it was trying to get him, it trying to grab him, I made a connection that this had to be it. What is this? It stood on 2 legs. It was about 8 foot tall. It was hairy, had long hair. It had a muscular physique. It had, you could tell it had the biceps and the forearms and the muscular thighs and the calves. But it was, covered in hair. It had pointed ears that stuck out on the sides. It had a snout. Not as long as a wolf, but it had a snout. It wasn't a flat face like a gorilla or an ape. It didn't have human facial recognitions. It had huge black eyes, and it proceeded to take a stance of extreme agitation and anger, and it spread its arms out, and it just opened its mouth up and just howled and screeched. It had claws. It had the pointed ears. It had, and when it raised up and went sideways, I could see the canines coming out. I could see, the snout coming out. I'm from up north, and the scariest thing we ever heard about was Momo, the monster of Bigfoot, and this was not any description of any Bigfoot I had ever seen. This was something like out of a horror movie. In our confusion and in our panic, Joey started pushing us towards the front door of the house, and we all went in. Rhonda did not see this. Thank God she did not see this. We went into the house. We barricaded the door with furniture, the kitchen furniture, the tables, the chairs. We grabbed butcher knives. We went and hid under his mom's bed. This was really terrifying because it was coming down. When we got to the door, it was coming down the hill towards us, down the driveway. Under the bed, we could hear it going around, just banging, hitting the walls of the house, walking around the house. We heard glass break. And the dogs outside, they just got quiet. Then we heard his aunt coming up over the hill, tooting her horn. She had just went to the grocery store. And that meant for us, that was our cue to come outside and help with the groceries. Needless to say, we didn't move. She got in the driveway, she tooted again, we wasn't moving. She got to the door. She had to break down the barricade. We heard furniture, falling into the floor and everything, and we heard her cussing and stuff. We finally come out, and we was all just visibly fearful, and she stopped and started, said, "What's wrong?" And Joey and I started talking at one time, and Rhonda was crying because she, in her confusion and fear, she didn't know what was going on. She didn't know what we saw, and we started to, Joey described his trip through the woods where this thing had ran neck and neck with him beside his motorbike, reached out and grabbed him and ripped his leg, or ripped his Levi's, and stalked him through the woods. And I proceeded to tell her what I saw at the top of the hill. And I remember their security light had popped on. And it wasn't really dark outside, but the tree shadow that went over that part of the driveway, it makes the security light kick on quicker. And it illuminated this figure. And it's an image that is etched in my brain. It still frightens me. It's still something I can't explain. It's something that I don't talk about to a lot of people, and haven't over the last, nearly 30 years. In fact, I went to a jeweler and described it to him, and he built this ring for me, because this is what I saw. This is a reminder of something that was flesh and blood, that was in our world. I believe this was a flesh and blood creature because it actually made contact with my cousin. It touched him. It stalked him. It has intelligence. And since then, he's opened up and talked about it, and mentioned several other incidents where he had seen it and made contact with it, where it had been stalking him or following him or sniffing the air around him. And after we told my aunt, we calmed down. We told my aunt what had happened. She called her husband, and he happened to be the sheriff of this town, and he come home. And he was very calm, and he had warned all of us, but especially Joey, not to go in this particular part of the woods. And he surveyed the damage around the house. Things had been knocked around and thrown, and he went and found the broken window to one of the basement bedrooms. There was hair and blood on the windows. I don't know what happened to the hair sample. I remember him taking it down. It was about 4 inches long. And it was a clump of hair. It wasn't like 1 or 2 strands. The next day, he went out to the woods with a rifle, and he come back a couple hours later, and he said, again warned us not to go back there, and that he said there's some pits dug back there, about 4 foot wide, and maybe 3 to 4 foot deep in the center, and there was animal bones in there, large animal bones, like deer carcasses and even coyotes. I'm pretty sure that my Uncle Fred knew or had seen this thing back there before and didn't want to frighten us kids. But just said don't go back there. But being a kid, you tell us not to do something, we're going to do it. And I myself had been back through there walking along the trails before this incident and had felt something watching me. It really upsets me to know that there's people that don't believe, and they pass judgment on you, and they fabricate stories about you and your life, and they make up their own rumors. I've heard many, but after 20-something years of this, I've decided to sit here and talk to you, Bart, about this and just get it out in the open. Because there are so many people out there, so many witnesses and possibly victims. They need to know that somebody's going to stand up and say, hey, this thing exists. It lives in these woods. You may not see it. But there's deer hunters that come down here, and there's 5,000 deer down here. 5,000 deer, I'm sorry. And they may deer hunt for a week and not see one deer. I worked at a nearby service station, 24-hour service station. I worked the midnight shift. And there were 2 local officers that used to come in and get coffee, and I knew them by name, and they come in for, like 3 or 4 times a week. And there was one particular night, actually mid-morning, about 2:30, between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, they come in, and I'll call them Adam and Bill, just like I did in the story, to protect their identities. Adam actually stayed outside. He sat on the curb of the station, and he was physically getting ill. They were both visibly shaken. They were very pale. And I asked, I said, is there something I can get you? Are you both sick? I thought maybe they both had the flu or something. Bill started shaking his head and said, I can't believe what we just saw. I can't believe what we've been through. He said that they got a call to come down to an area in Lake Between the Lakes to assist in an investigation. 2 campers had found a campsite that had after several minutes of silence from both of them, Bill started to speak very slowly. He said they had been called in to assist in an investigation at a campsite in the LBL area. That 2 campers had stumbled across a campsite that had a truck with a pull-along trailer, and that a crime had been committed there. When they got there, there was already police lines up. There was cruisers from various counties. There was 2, I know that I remember him saying, coroner trucks from different counties. The trailer, the camping trailer, was, it looked like it had been beat. There was blood and handprints, bloody handprints. The door to the trailer was ripped off. The campsite was just tore apart, and he proceeded to, he talked about the victims, the bodies. He said there was a male body found, a female body found, and a little boy's body found, what was left of them. The bodies were ravaged. They were torn in several sections. The father figure had an arm actually ripped from the torso, and it had a clump of hair in its hands. That he noticed that they took that out and put it in a bag, and there were several different officers around that were bagging things and tagging things and marking with flag markers. And he said the bodies, there was claw marks in the bodies, especially on the man's back. He was describing that, where there was a wide radius of scratch marks, and deep that went through the entire back, the flesh. There were bite marks, and there was a coroner there that had been measuring the radius, the bite radius, trying to determine what had created all this carnage. And one of the officers that came out of the camper, he said that we have a problem. And they said, what? He said, well, we found a man's clothing, female clothing, the mother's clothing, and they found the little boy's clothing, and they found some little girl's clothing. So they assumed that they was missing a body. So a search ensued. It was Adam. He felt something dripping on his hat, and then he looked down and it was dripping on his shirt, and he took his flashlight and he looked up, and his light caught the glimmer of a little leg that was hanging, and they found the little girl. She had been taken up in a tree, and it looked like her back had been broke because they said the body was hanging over the limb, and her intestines and body organs seemed to be missing. As he was telling this story, reliving this and retelling, then the marks on Adam's hat and his shirt, it hit me that, okay, this is blood. This is blood. It was hard for me to comprehend what they were saying. He continued, and he paused several times during this retelling, like he was trying to gain his composure, or he was trying to grasp everything that he was seeing, and he continued and said that there was conversations on could it have been a bear, could it have been a cougar or a panther, and one of the medical personnel that was present said no, the bite radius doesn't match, there's no bears in this area, and everybody was saying, well, it looks like a bear attack. They couldn't pinpoint what had done this. He mentioned that some government officials came in at the last and told everybody that they were taking over the investigation. I remember listening to the local news and getting the paper every day, and there was nothing mentioned in the media about anything like this. They come in a couple months later, and Adam had stayed in the car, and Bill had got out, and I noticed that their hair had turned white, mostly white. They had aged 12, 15 years. A lot of stress. Their faces were gaunt. They weren't talkative anymore. They weren't jolly. They weren't themselves anymore. 3 to 4 months after that, which would make about 6 months after this incident, that Adam came in to get some coffee one night, and he said, "Do you remember that hair Bill was telling you about that was found in that man's hand?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "They had sent it off." And he said, "We heard that they couldn't match it to any DNA. But the closest they got was canis lupus." I'm not saying that the Vista LBL committed this carnage. I'm not saying this really happened. I will tell you this, that these two gentlemen, their entire personalities, their demeanors changed overnight and continued so.
The land between the lakes was created out of an area once known as the land between the rivers. In 1963, John F. Kennedy declared that the new area should be made into a national recreation site. The flooding from these dams displaced residents who had been there for generations, inundating old towns and even cemeteries. The structures that remained were summarily bulldozed and buried where they fell. The cemeteries left on high ground officially ceased to exist to the families of the dead and became property of the state. To this day, there is bitter resentment for what was done to the proud few residents of the former land between the rivers. The area is beautiful, but there is also a sense of foreboding that emanates from this place. Perhaps it is the souls of the dead now forced into a watery resting place, or perhaps something even more sinister. During my attempt to negotiate filming in one of the oldest cemeteries in the area, I agreed to do a free piece on the ongoing conflict between the Land Between the Rivers Association and the TVA and Park Service. However, somebody started making phone calls to the LBR members alleging a film crew was filming a monster movie in the area and would bring shame to the association. Therefore, that portion of the project has fallen victim to the ongoing war that has festered since the flooding took place in the late 50s. I often wonder if it was an effort to cover up the murdered family, as sources I have spoken with on both sides of the issue rigorously deny any involvement in making the phone calls. It has also been stipulated that a special permit was needed to film on federal lands and that the project would be stalled until one was issued. I have been a photographer for 30 years and have done still and movie footage on federal lands throughout the country and have never heard of such a requirement. I have since abandoned my efforts to work with the Land Between the Rivers Association in reference to the documentary of their plight.
Since this happened in the early 80s, past 26 years, I've had numerous people contact me either through phone, email, or personal visits and give me tidbits of this incident to verify that it did happen. One lady in particular told me that she had her father had retired from TVA, and that when he would get intoxicated, he would speak briefly of this incident and say, yes, it did happen, but the feds came in and said that we would lose our pensions, we'd lose our jobs, and he said, and some of us were threatened with our lives. Since then, it was briefly after this incident happened, I went down there myself, where this supposedly happened. I wanted to see it. And it was a road that you drove through a creek, and it would go on down to and meet with the Barkley Lake. And there was a little cul-de-sac with maybe like 4 campsites to the right. And since then, this road has been gated off. It appears that there were some mysterious concrete structures that were built upon this road, at the end of this road, or at mid-length of this road. The creek is not there anymore. It's like diverted through the woods and comes back out on another part of a separate road. There have been witnesses that come forward that said that those bunkers were not there prior to the 80s. It's very all mysterious if it is a cover-up, if indeed this happened. It's just very coincidental that this road was gated off, that these structures were built and tore down and just the foundations were left. And that anybody that asks about this incident to the authorities or whatever, they all have the same repeated story. It's like rehearsed.
At the time this film was released, we had still not uncovered any plausible explanation for the use of these strange structures. Most were underground. Those that were not were found to have unshingled roofs that were at the same elevation as the adjacent ground level, suggesting that there had been soil removed when the structures were abandoned. In fact, if the witness was correct about the area being altered, the bunkers found breached in the hillsides were damaged intentionally to allow for the shortening of the road and the diversion of the creek. Waste items, including a tar bucket and other metal trash, all olive drab, were located along the road leading to the area. One park employee stated emphatically that these were nothing more than root cellars from old homes in the area, but root cellars are not built of reinforced concrete with copper-lined tops, to say nothing about having no way in or out. You be the judge.